Hi, my name's Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. In this video interview, I got to sit down with Gui Ferreira, who's a fellow Dometrain author, YouTuber, and a developer advocate. Now, Guy has been developing software for years now, and we talked about transitioning into a different type of role, and we also got to touch on things like TDD and what that means from his perspective. I thought it was really cool to hear. We hadn't rehearsed it ahead of time or talked about it ahead of time, but he defined having tests as things for developers that allow us to have peace of mind and build confidence. And when I talk about testing, that's the number one thing that I also say. It's for building confidence. So I think there's a lot of awesome takeaways from this video. He's an excellent content creator, excellent course author, and I think that you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So sit back, enjoy, and we'll see you next time. Well, Guy, if you don't mind, could you give the audience a little bit of background for,
Sure.
kind of where you started, how maybe like the day that you realized like I'm getting into software, and then kind of where you're at now?
Yeah. So, just as a frame of context, I'm from Portugal, and when I got into tech, it was quite by accident, to be honest. Um, I came from a household without a lot of possessions, so my parents always told me and my brother that they could support us till the second year is the 12th grade. It's before university, let's say.
Yeah,
Try to match with other systems.
sure.
So they couldn't pay for university, so they always told us that they would support us until that day. So it's basically when we turn 18. Then we would need to work.
Okay,
So that led me to take a decision somewhere in my education to take something that we have here that is a professional course. So instead of being something generic where you learn about math, English, physics, things like that, you would focus on a given profession.
okay,
And I was looking in my town the options that I had, and I had basically three options. One was about tourism.
okay.
The other one it was about something around communication. It was kind of like marketing and things like that. And the third one was IT. So I took that as kind of like a leap of faith. I
Sure.
didn't know what was programming, to be honest. But I was lucky because I really got into it.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, I fall in love when I had my first programming classes, to be honest. So I was somewhere 16, something like that.
You're right.
And I stuck to it. I got my first job, and eventually I decided to keep studying. I got into university. I was working during the day, studying during the night. It was quite hard, but so I'm a professional developer since 2006, and I got into a job. My first job, it was with .NET at the time. I was building web forms with
Okay.
.NET
Yeah.
2.1, something like that. No, first I started with VB.NET and quickly moved to
So
C
did I.
Sharp. Yeah,
Awesome.
quickly moved to C Sharp. So I was in a part of a team where most people were building things with Microsoft Dynamics. I think that was the name at the time.
Okay.
And I was the only one, me and my boss, building things like APIs with C Sharp and things like that. So then I kept studying. I moved jobs to a different company because I was in a kind of like a consulting gig. So I
Sure.
wanted to see the other side, to be in the IT of the company. So I moved to a different company to be kind of like the system analyst or project manager, whatever you want to call it. Um, it was not my thing. So then I got the opportunity to go to a startup to build something from the ground up. I was the most experienced developer there, so I had to lead a lot of things there. And I stayed there for a long time, for 8 years, I think so.
Nice. Okay.
What is uncommon for for this field.
Yeah.
Yeah, and eventually I wanted to do different things, and I wanted to be in a position where I could build software for a huge enterprise, for demanding software, scalable software, all of that. So I went to work at a fintech. And then when I confessed I was not expecting, I moved to my previous company to perform a role that was not something that I was expecting, that is being kind of like a developer advocate for open source.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was something that I knew I wanted to try, but I couldn't find that in Portugal.
Interesting.
And remote was hard as well. So when I saw that opportunity on LinkedIn, I got in touch with someone that I knew there, and I got there. Eventually, the company was sold. There was a huge layoff, and I took that as a chance to try to be an educator. Is the best word that I use to describe what I do nowadays. So basically, I have YouTube. I do courses, workshops, talks, all those things. Because
And that is your full time, like that is what you
currently,
do for yourself. Awesome.
yes, I'm trying to survive this way
Yeah.
to pay the bills. Because somewhere in my journey, I was extremely convinced that I wanted to be a manager,
Hmm.
but I was not aware that being a manager was more than what I was expecting. So there was one part that I loved on the job, that is helping someone to grow,
Right.
and there was another part that I don't like, that is that managing part, and I need to approve holidays and things like that.
Yeah.
So I realized that if I wanted to help others to grow, there's something better than being sit one-on-one sometimes. Maybe it's better to do it through content, through courses, to conferences, to be a mentor, all of those things. So I know that that is what I want to do in my career, so I'm trying it.
That's awesome. So thank you for sharing that because even at the beginning, this sort of path that you have to pick to go down, right? That's a
Hmm.
very interesting framing. I guess like obviously based on us being from different countries, the fact that like if there were three sort of professional areas to go into, one of them being tourism, to me, I'm like, oh, that's very odd. And then I'm thinking like, yeah, actually, that's not very odd at all, depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah.
That could be a huge, field to be in. So
Portugal, I think that we don't export a lot. So most money that comes from abroad comes from through tourism.
right.
That's why there's a lot of schools that have that as one of the main professions that they will teach you. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, like when you said it, I was kind of like thinking in my head, I'm like, and then it kind of clicked, like, yeah, that totally makes sense. But it's also super cool that, like you said, leap of faith, right? You're like, because some people are like, oh, I was born with a keyboard in my hands at the terminal, like I
Hmm.
knew I was going to be a programmer. Other people, it's like they switch after they've started their career. But for you, it was like, it kind of looked like three options. I'm going to pick one, and it
Yeah,
just happened to be
I got
something you
lucky.
liked.
It was pure luck, to be honest. I could have taken the decision to go with another one, and I wouldn't like it likely, and I would do my best, but it wouldn't be something that I would show up every day trying to be a bit better.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. I wanted to dig in a little bit about the startup kind of landscape versus the
Hmm.
fintech, but I wanted to mention one thing before that. And I'm saying it out loud so I don't forget because I have a
Yes.
bad habit of tangents. So here's the first tangent. But I was talking with Scott Hanselman the other day, and one thing that he said that I thought was super interesting and really resonated with what you just said was uh, he had said, and I don't know the exact quote, even though it was recently, but something along the lines of, we were talking about career paths, and he said, "I don't think my thing is computers." And I'm sitting there going, like, what the heck do you mean your thing's not computers? Like Scott Hanselman,
Yes.
you are the computer guy. You are the 3D printer, the I'm gonna hack things together. Like, and he's like, no, I don't think my thing's computers. He's like, I think I'm a teacher. Like I think I'm here for teaching.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy crap, like, yeah, like that actually makes sense, right? And so that kind of resonated when you said it. When Scott was saying that to me, I was thinking, even for myself, like, I think my thing is still software. Like I love the idea of thinking software is just like infinite Lego
Hmm.
bricks. but I do feel very fulfilled by helping educate. Like there's something about that when people can say, "Hey, that really helped me." I go, "Wow, like that feels good." So
Yeah, I have been thinking about that because we tend to put labels
right,
um, in what we do. So even nowadays, if someone that's not from the field asks me what I do, I will likely say I'm a software engineer, I'm a developer, I'm something like that.
sure,
Because I'm still that, but because I still build software. But there's one part of my job that I think it's more important than that, than delivering bits, is teaching others. The
right,
problem is those labels. It's quite hard to assign a label that says I'm a developer teacher. That doesn't exist. I'm a developer educator, something like that. You can't even find a role model out there that uses a label like that.
right,
So that's why it's hard. I still don't know. For example, my daughter, she's 7, and when I decided to go in this path to work in these things, she asked me, "What do you do now?" And it's hard to me to explain, to be honest.
right,
It's not as tangible as saying I build software for
right.
this company.
And it's
That
you had mentioned doing like developer advocate work, and in my
Mhm.
head, I'm like, I wonder if that's close, but at the same time, that almost seems like the goal is not to educate in general. It's almost like to, and I know I don't want to do an injustice to that job title, but it almost seems like a marketer for the language or the tech versus like an educator.
Yeah, I always defined that role, at least the way that I positioned myself on the company doing that role, as I would represent the software out there, but I would represent the community inside. Okay,
Right,
so I don't want to know how we build this thing. Okay, what I want to know is that it's good for the others out there to have success with it. Because I will I'm the ultimate representative of them when
right,
we are taking important decisions. So it's not. You can take it as a marketing thing. You can take it as a sales thing, and usually that's one typical discussion in developer relations. That is where this role should fit in. You will see someone in developer relations reporting to marketing or to sales or sometimes to tech, and that will change the way that you act
right.
naturally.
Your
Yeah.
responsibilities end up being aligned to like
Yeah.
who you're reporting to, right?
Yes.
Before we continue on, this is just a quick reminder that I do have courses available on Dometrain. If you're just getting started in your programming journey and you want to learn C Sharp, you can head over to Dometrain. I have a Getting Started in C Sharp course. It's approximately 5 hours of content taking you from absolutely no experience to being able to program in C Sharp. And after that, I have my Deep Dive course, which will take you to the next level with another 6 hours of content so that you can start building basic applications. Head over to Dometrain and check it out. Let's head back to the video.
And I have seen that in myself as well, because in my role, since it was connected to open source, I was also doing a bit of governance inside. Things like, are we using open source correctly? Are we
Sure.
using licenses that we can? All those types of things. And while I was there, I moved from one manager to another, and that changed the focus of my role as well, because one person was more focused with one aspect of my job and the other one was
Right.
focused on another one, and that naturally will change the way that you act, because they are your managers. They
Mhm.
somehow they define the pipeline of work that you have. They will leave
Yep.
things into you if when they see it. So yeah.
Very interesting. And so the part I wanted to come back to, because I think that people that have experienced this kind of thing, like I don't think everyone has this opportunity or has gone through it, but this startup versus something like
Hmm.
fintech, like this is a super like open-ended question I'm curious about from your experience though. Could you talk about some of the dynamics like that you had at like startup life versus then going to fintech? Because for some people that are watching this, I think or listening to it, this idea of like, okay, I want to go for my first job, and like, I want to be at big tech, or I want the big company name. Like, I'm just curious. You obviously did both. Like,
Hmm.
what were your experiences like at each place?
Yeah. Often when that question comes is from the perspective of where will I learn most? Is it on a startup? Is it on fintech or a huge company? And I usually say that you can learn a lot in both of them depending
Sure.
on how you behave. Okay. You
Okay.
cannot learn anything on both of them if you are not looking for knowledge. Um, the thing is, in a startup, you will learn a bit of a lot of things. You need to do a lot of things.
Hmm.
Um, I used to say that if I had to take the trash out, I would do it, and I think I have done that sometimes. Uh, but when you compare that to a fintech, for example, you still will learn a lot, but it's more of a specific thing. Okay.
Right.
So, because usually you will have a domain where you will focus and you will be working on that. However, if I had to recommend someone to take the decision, do I go first with a startup or with something like a big tech? I would say first take the chance to go to a startup, because early in your career you can take more risks. If things go wrong, it's it's fine. You will find other thing, and also you will learn so much about a lot of things that will build you kind of like a foundational knowledge that then you can build on top. And also you can use that opportunity to find out what you really like. For
Right.
example, on that startup, I onboarded some people that was their first job, and it was quite interesting. For example, with since you are in a startup, you can't hire someone only for UI, someone only for backend, or things like that. Everyone is full
You
stack.
can't. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. But it was quite interesting to see some people being extremely good on the UI and leaning into that, and others that couldn't touch it. It
Hmm.
was kind of like a natural thing, like if the brain didn't work that way. And I know at least one person that was so good with UI that eventually, when he left, he goes to a big company. I think it's a bank, and he's only doing UI because he realizes that was the thing that he really likes. So he built a
Right.
career around that. But first, he got all the knowledge about how to build software by doing a lot of things in the day to day. One important thing is that startup life can be extremely hard. Usually, work-life balance is not the thing.
Yep.
Um, yeah, because there's not a lot of people. There's a lot of things going on fast. You are in survival mode, and when things
Hmm.
go wrong, it's hard to say no. When you are in big tech, you can have an healthy relationship with your job, in my opinion. But I learned a lot in fintech as well, because I moved from building software for 1,000 people to building
Right.
software with millions of transactions per second.
The scale is different, right? Like, it's, I mean, usually very different, but
And the
yeah.
responsibility as well. Even if you are one in the middle of 2,000 developers, one mistake might have a lot of impact.
Right.
Um, and you gain that feeling in every single thing that you do.
Yeah. That's I've tried to explain this, and I don't know if I have a great way to do it, but the sort of the current career I have, and previously I worked in digital forensics prior to
Mm.
Microsoft. And for us, digital forensics was like, we had close relationships with the customers. You would hear like our company would bring in people to speak to the developers and sales and marketing team about how they were using our software to help catch pedophiles and solve cases. And like, that feeling was like, this is incredible that we're having such an impact. Um, Now at Microsoft, the difference is not like we don't have an impact, but how it looks is different. So, for example, I'm on a routing team within Substrate,
Mm.
and we serve trillions of requests per day. Like, it's not that there's no impact or whatever, or one company had no impact versus the other, but the impact you have just looks very different. And I think for some people, and it's not necessarily just a startup versus big company kind of thing, but I think you want to sample some things to figure out like what motivates you and what kind of makes you feel good, right? I know for some people, if you're working on a platform team, if I said, hey, look, we're serving trillions of requests, this is for people across the planet, if they're not interacting or feeling like they're getting that response from a customer, that direct feedback, they might not feel as engaged. Whereas
Hmm.
other people might say, I don't care about that. Knowing that we have like such a huge impact across the planet, like that's really what's cool to me. And I think you said a really interesting point about being in startups and kind of sampling a little bit of like everything going on around you. I think that's a huge value add that I don't think a
Yeah.
lot of people consider that.
I don't know how is it in your team, and maybe being an engineer manager, you are responsible for what I will say.
Sure.
But I have the feeling on working on some big companies that one of the biggest problems sometimes is that developers lose touch with the end user,
Hmm.
and often they are so protected to spend their time just building stuff that they don't understand how things will be used.
Yep.
And often that it's because of either the relationship with the manager or the product owner that don't want developers in touch with the users.
Hmm.
And I had that experience, and that is one of the things that if I didn't have work in a startup, maybe or in a consulting company, I wouldn't understand if I start right away in big tech, the impact of what you do. Okay,
Right.
for example, on my first job, I was kind of like a consultant, and I recall going to meetings and having the client looking over my shoulder to what I
Yep.
was doing, and going there when things went wrong, when things didn't work, and those are amazing learning opportunities.
Right.
Um,
But yeah, no, I think you're spot on. At least from I say spot on from my experience, at least. And I think to exaggerate that too, if we take a big company and on a platform team, right? So like, who are the customers? Like we have
yes.
almost two layers of customers. One is always going to be the end user. That's like, why does our business exist? Like, there's end users, right? So we have that level of customer. But for a platform team, you have customers that are basically internal teams that you're supporting. So on the routing team that I'm on, for example, our first line of customers that I would say are all of the partner services that need to route requests
Hmm.
or have external clients, like external customers, having their requests routed to these services. So I think a couple things happen in big companies, and again, generalization. So it's not like a rule that's carved in stone, but I think in bigger companies you start to get more specialization of skills. And one such thing is you can have people that are truly like product owners that are like, my responsibility is to go figure out these types of interactions, what's important for the users. And then that kind of starts to isolate some developers from that.
Yeah.
Generalization, but I think that can happen. Uh, I have absolutely experienced, even switching to this team that I'm on now at the beginning of this year, there were like, I kind of joined after a planning cycle had been finished.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like me jumping into it and saying, hey, look, like you guys already know what you're supposed to be doing. I'm catching up here. And as I was onboarding and understanding more, I started to realize that like I have awesome engineers, and in some cases they were like here's what I was told to do, and like I understand it and I'm going to go build it, but they didn't understand why, which is seems
Got it.
kind of weird. But I remember having held a meeting for one of the feature crews that I own, and I had been talking with one of the product owners, and some thoughts came up, and I was like, hey, like this isn't going to be an immediate action, like we have to shift gears, but we should talk about this as a within our feature crew to see like how that might shift our priorities coming up in the next few months, like kind of like a brainstorming thing. But like selfishly, it was a little bit for me to kind of catch up on things. And I talked with one of the engineers the next day in our one-on-one, and I said, hey, what did you think about that conversation? It seemed pretty interesting. Like, what do you think? And he said, I wanted to say thank you for holding that meeting. And I remember being like, why? Like, you're one of the more senior engineers. Like, why? And he said, like, he said, I knew what we were building, but I didn't fully understand
Why?
like the implication of why. And I was like, holy crap, okay, like, and it was just a reminder. You kind of said it right, but that as an engineering manager, like, I need to make sure that uh, I would hope at all times I want my engineers to know, like, here's why you're building it. And having, you said it as well, for like startups and small companies, I feel like you get a lot more of that because you're almost forced to see it.
Yes. Do you work with a product owner as part of your team or
So
not?
right now, so the previous team I was on, so I worked in deployment before within Substrate, and I would say the engineering managers were basically the product owners.
Okay.
We did have product managers at the time, and they mostly acted as, like, I would call, like, project managers. So they
Hmm.
really helped us a tremendous amount with cross teamwork, like to keep everything organized. In the last year that I was on that team, there was a bit of a reorg where the product managers truly did become more like product owners. And now on my current team, I would say it seems like it's kind of weird, but also it's very healthy. Like the product managers we have do act like the product owners, but I work with them on it. So like we kind of own it
Okay.
together, which is
Yes.
nice.
That's also the idea. Um, I had that discussion the other day with a friend of what, in fact, a product owner should do,
Right.
because it's one of those things that usually we take it with the experience that we have with by working with someone,
Right.
but then we see the role being performed in several different ways, and I'm always curious to see if it works or not. To be honest, because sometimes I see that the problem is that one of hiding the reasons from developers. Um, that's the thing. It's completely different when you see someone using your software or understand why they need it. I have an excellent example, by the way. Um, I got, I think it was 2 months ago, something like that. I
Okay.
went to the doctor with my daughter, and the doctor was complaining because he wanted to prescribe some meds, and they have now a system where they need to pick from a predefined field the frequency that the med should be taken.
Okay.
And he only could do something like twice a day, 3 times a day, things like that. And then the system would print saying you should take it at imagine midnight, then 8 a.m., things like that. And he didn't want to. He wanted me to use the meds, I think, 3 times a day, but he didn't want
Okay.
me to wake up my daughter in the middle of the night just because of that. So it was fine to adjust a few hours, but he couldn't do it because the developer that built that form, or the team that built that form, didn't know that. So you get a list of requirements. It says that for this type of med, you should have the frequency predefined, and they
Right.
don't even leave an option other or something like text field that you can use to write down what you want.
They just split the interval in
Yeah,
24 hours, four times. Okay.
yeah.
It start at midnight, 6 a.m. Yeah.
It's reasonable if we think as an engineer, right?
Right.
But now we think as an user, and if we see the frustration that it creates in a doctor, you understand that that is a mess.
Right.
Unless you have that contact, you will not get it, to be honest.
Interesting. Yeah. That's yeah, I feel like, back to the idea around startups. My experience, at least, was very much as you were explaining, where by by being in a smaller company, you're wearing many hats. That phrase gets used a lot, right? So you're
Hmm.
wearing many hats, and as a result, yeah, you get pulled into all these different things. But I feel like, one of the biggest benefits was just feeling a lot more connected to understanding, like, we have value that we need to ship to customers. And maybe I'll kind of wrap up this section with this thought, but this idea of, like, and maybe I want to hear your experience on this too. But like, basically, coming from school, we have all these ideas about what code is supposed to look like, right? It's all Like, here's the patterns, here's the theoretical, like, here's how code gets written.
Yeah.
And I found that like I quickly had to learn it's not just about having perfect code. It's like, how are you getting value to customers, and having to balance that where you'd have, like, we were a startup, we were hiring more people, and you'd have people coming on saying that the code's not perfect yet. And it's like, it doesn't matter how perfect it is, because the end users aren't reading the code. Like, we need to be able to fix the critical bugs. We can't spend 2 months refactoring and rewriting something and not shipping value. So it forced us all of the time to be having these really difficult conversations around, like, yes, we need to balance like fixing tech debt and addressing these things so that they don't go off the rails, but like, you have to be delivering value. If
Yeah.
we don't, our company does not exist. So I'm curious what your experience was like that.
I have a lot of things that I could say there. One thing that I think is not acceptable at all is this idea that we developers we tend to have, that we believe that is acceptable. That's if someone asks us when this refactoring will be ready, we say whenever it's ready. And if the other side asks, what do I get from it? We basically say kind of like the same thing, but better.
Sure.
And we think this is reasonable, but
Right.
it's not. And there's also a lack of respect by what pays your wages usually. For example, I've worked in some companies where it was the legacy system that no one wants to work with that was paying 90% of the bills.
Mhm.
Um, it is what it is. We like to do sexy things and to play with new tech to build things perfectly as we believe. But often is not what we are looking for. And I've learned that on that experience that I told you, that I worked in the other side, and kind of like a system analyst. We used to build some software, some internal tools, and especially when you are building for internally, sometimes we have the natural tendency of let me grab Visual Studio and build something, and often it can be solved with spreadsheet, maybe,
Yep.
and yeah, you solve the problem. It's I think that is the reason why so many people is scared about things like AI replacing developers, because we got used to the idea that being a developer is the part of writing the code, is
Right.
typing. Um, but there's the other part that I believe we spend more time there, but we usually don't put as much effort on learning, on improving on that side. That is, how will I solve this thing in the most
Right.
efficient way, in a way that is beneficial to the company.
Right. I feel like that's the engineering part of software engineering, is like figuring out these trade-offs, balancing these things properly.
Yeah.
And then the vehicle that we use for that is generally code, right? It doesn't always have to be. In fact, I think some of the best solutions are when you can say, we don't need code for this. Like, we can solve this by getting the answer we need to the problem without having written
Yeah.
code and nothing else to maintain there. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, especially on the AI part. Like if your only job as a software engineer was how do you make more code, yeah, you probably want to be pretty worried.
Yes. Yes.
Very interesting. Maybe on a good segue into, like, because I don't know if this changes from your experience from smaller companies over to say something like fintech, but testing, right? I
Yes.
can remember in our early startup days, we didn't have tests. In fact, we didn't have, builds. Like, we made desktop software, and one of the interns had, like, his machine was the build machine,
Mm-hmm.
and we would say, okay, it's the release date, and we'd say it's time, like, open Visual Studio, build it, copy the folders around. And I can remember days where we would upload it, our founder would pull down from the website, and he would go run it, and he was like, this isn't the right build. And we were all like, oh no. Like, we kind of lived through these things, and that whole process literally included no testing. Like the testing was the founder pulling it down and going, looks good, right? He would go, so it was a search engine. He would go run the search and say, he'd have a like he would do the baseline comparison to make sure that it was only net new things and
Mhm.
fixes. But there was no automation per build. You wouldn't commit something and it runs this suite of regression tests. It was like, cross your fingers, and when it's release date, the founder is going to tell you if it's right.
Yes. Uh, I see that, and I see myself on that as well. I think that the best way to answer that is, for example, somewhere in your career, you have learned about dependency inversion, for example,
Right.
inversion of control. And you learn about that, and someone will tell you that it's important and you should do it, and things like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But you
I'll
will,
keep that in the back of my head and
yeah,
like,
and
that's
and
nice.
eventually you will do it, and yeah, until the day that in fact you suffer by the fact that you haven't done it. On that day, you
Yep.
are changed. Okay? And the same thing happens with testing, to be honest. For a long time, testing was not my thing at all. Until I suffered a lot with it.
Mhm.
Um, I think I have told this story many times, especially if someone has watched one of my talks. I I was 27 when I was diagnosed with a chronic disease that causes a lot of back pain and other things that can be a bit worse than that. Um, and when I was diagnosed with that, I had tried to change some things in my life, and eventually I realized that one of the triggers was stress.
Mm.
And it was at the time that I was working on a startup with no work-life balance and all of
Which
that.
isn't no stress there, right? Not at all.
Exactly. And as you can expect, when you need to deliver things with aggressive deadlines, tests is not a thing. Okay. We had some tests, but I wouldn't
In
feel
the end,
safe, to be
yeah,
honest.
you're going to end up taking shortcuts, and
Yeah.
the thing that the thing that you're not compromising is like is the perceived value to the customer, right?
Exactly.
So hey, we can put the bug fix in. Like we ran it. We all as developers and product owners were like, yeah, it's doing the thing. Like, did we write tests? No, but we all saw it work. Like, yeah, press
Yeah.
the button. Let's go.
That's the spirit. So, and it was at that time that I had to deal with a lot of stress, and I was feeling it in my health that I paid more attention into testing, and I gave him a serious look. You know that when you learn something because you feel that you need to learn, or when you learn something but in fact you invest in it, you stick to it, you try it, and you dig into the topic, is what I have done. And that changed everything to me. I will not say that on that company I could have the impact that I want.
Sure.
It it takes a long time once you start the path without tests in mind to get into a place where you feel confident with software. But I can say that after that experience, I I could push anything to production feeling confident, to be honest. And even nowadays I feel that because of my relationship with testing and with everything that I learned. But I can tell you that I wouldn't be such an advocate for testing nowadays if I hadn't suffered what I have suffered in the past. Okay? Because now I get it. Okay? It's the thing. Oh, I think it's Kent Beck that says that is the creator of, not the creator, but the one that made TDD the thing.
Sure.
And it says that we are paid to write code, not to write tests. And that is true. But I think that tests are above all a tool for us, not a tool for the others. Okay.
Mhm.
It's about me as a developer have peace of mind above all
Yeah.
and feeling confident. And also it's a productivity tool, in my opinion. Okay. I don't feel that running my debugger every single time that I do a change to see and click in some buttons to make sure that everything is fine. I don't think that is productivity when compared to writing an automation test, for example. My relationship with testing comes from that side, to be honest, from that experience of suffering and needing to go through it and finding a solution for that. And I understand why many people don't like it, because from the outside, it looks like sometimes a waste of time.
Yep.
Until you, in fact, you suffer with it and you need to do it. The same thing as dependency inversion.
Yeah, I know, I like those examples a lot, but I think it's almost it's like I don't know if it's just like a human thing, but you probably see this come up a lot where people are, you have newer developers and stuff, and they'll say, "Hey, like, can you just like tell me how to tell me the three secrets to being like a senior developer?" And it's almost like, look, you unfortunately, even if I could tell you that, you're gonna have to make the mistakes to actually value them. Which is like, we learn the hard way, and I wish it wasn't the case, but uh, your example of like you have to kind of feel the pain before you go, okay, like we got to make some changes here. That completely resonates with me. The example that I have to share there, like we were so I was managing teams very early on at this previous company, and a lot of so it was a pretty small team that I had to work with. We were doing a lot of prototypes. And at one point, there was a very big software release, and they kind of said, "Hey, like, can you pause the prototyping because we have this very big release? Can we leverage your team to basically go in and like help these other teams to go, make some
Yeah.
progress in different areas?" Absolutely makes sense. It's a really good business justification, right? This thing makes the money. The prototypes are for the future, and we're on a deadline, so no problem. So what we were doing as our small team was they would give us some part of this UI to go work on. And so we have our pieces carved out. We'd work with our product owner, we'd go deliver stuff, land it, and we're like, awesome, this is great. Then what would happen is like a week would go by and we were working on the next part. And when we would go to land that stuff, everything that we had done before was broken. And we would have the other core team going, "You guys are messing all this stuff up." So their stuff was getting broken and they were breaking our stuff. So we're putting
Mhm.
code into the same areas. And I remember like they kept getting frustrated and we kept getting frustrated. And I said, "We're changing." And what we started doing, because this is all like mostly UI stuff, we just said, "We're putting tests in on everything we're doing." Like, I don't care what part of the UI it is, because a lot of people are like, "Oh, then you have to go structure, like you need clickable, tests that are
Yeah.
going to run." And we're like, we're designing stuff, so we don't necessarily need it. We'll do whatever we can to get the regression coverage. And we started doing that. And then basically the other team stopped breaking us. So we're happy. But they kept saying, "You're breaking our stuff." And we said, "How do we know? How can we possibly know that we'll be breaking your stuff if there's nothing to tell us?" So then we started saying, "Look what we're doing. We're writing these tests. You guys, like, if you want, you can come in and go touch our code.
Yeah.
Touch it as much as you want, because now we have full confidence that you can't even push the code up to break our own stuff because there's tests there to tell you this is broken." And that was a huge learning for us. And we took that kind of principle on everything we did going forward, to just be like, even if we don't need to test everything like line by line, 100% coverage, we're building stuff to be testable. So that was our big takeaway.
Yeah, and the 100% is not the thing that you are looking for, but the confidence and writing to be testable, I think it's the sentence. For example,
Yeah.
architecting to be testable, doing everything to be testable is what important is
And
important.
when you have that ability, then you can make decisions, right? If you say, "I'm writing things to be testable," you're in a position to say, and I should have called out, I love that you keep saying confidence,
Mhm.
because I have found that when I'm trying to explain testing to other people, my go-to phrase is, "This is to have confidence." And I don't care like how you want to go test, or I don't know your architecture, your application. But at the end of the day, if I can say you want to test for confidence, that should guide you in the direction. But um, yeah, like, just I can't remember what I was saying because I did a tangent again. But yeah, the whole idea is just like, building stuff to be testable gives you this flexibility to say, is it time to put the tests in? Like, or can we maybe take a shortcut? We'll come back and add tests, or We don't even know, maybe this part of the code might not live long. We're kind of doing a feature test or a prototype, and at least it's testable. If we
Yeah.
need to cut it out, sure. Like maybe we didn't spend extra time, but hey, this is living a little bit longer than we thought. It's starting to be more solidified. Yeah, this is becoming a core part. Go add the tests now, build more confidence around it. So that's been sort of my experience in that realm.
Especially when you need to get back to something that you have built a long time ago, or someone else built a long time ago, or as it had happened to me, being on call, you in the middle of the night, if something goes wrong and you need to do a quick fix without tests, I would be worried, right?
Yeah.
You can make something even worse because you are wake up in the middle of the night, so you are not fresh,
Yep.
and you need to react fast. So that's why I think it's worthy to invest in testing. I will not argue if you should test first or test after. You need to
Sure.
have a safety net. Is my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, from your own experiences, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like from your own experiences and different types of projects, you might have a preference to say, "Hey, I'm going to test first." Like if you love doing TDD
Yep.
and that works well for you, you'll probably say, "Yeah, I test basically everything first." But perhaps for other people in different projects, if that's not what works well for them, like as long as you build the confidence, right?
And I've learned that we all think differently. The process of building code is different, and sometimes one technique might not stick to you
Right.
as other technique. I have a colleague that the way that he used to type code, it was so different than the way that I usually used to think, that doing pair programming with him was quite strange, but it was the way that the brain worked for him. For
Sure.
example, I came to the conclusion that some developers start kind of like from the bottom up. So if they know that they need a method to do something and another method to do something, they will first do those leaves of the code, and eventually they build a method on top
Piece
to
it all back
relate every
together.
single thing. And others start from the top and they start creating placeholders, and eventually they drill down into the place
Okay.
where they fill the gaps. And those two things are two different mental models. So the same thing happens with testing first, testing after. That's why some people don't click when they apply a strategy. Other times it's because they don't stick to it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a valid point too. I think, like honestly, for me, I test almost everything I do is tested after, but there's absolutely certain types of problems where I'm like, I know from my experience, I need to test first because I just know myself well enough that this is a type of thing where I'm like, you're going to be wasting so much time trying to code it unless you're putting these systems in place
Yeah.
to test first. But I think like I think the idea of TDD is great, but I think my probably my biggest complaint when people talk about TDD is it's kind of like anything where people say this is the only way to do it, and if you don't agree, then you're wrong. And I'm like, I just don't know if you can make claims like that like so broadly.
No, you can't. And unfortunately, when there are techniques that it takes so much time to get it and you go through a lot of pain to get it, and some people during the process it doesn't work out from them, so they are in the other side of the camp. It's natural that you have arguments like those ones,
Sure.
and is unhealthy. um, to be honest, I'm a fan of test driven development, but I'm aware that saying you just don't get it is not a way of helping anyone,
Sure.
because that's in fact a learning process to get there. And I don't say that it's better than other things, because the best developers that I worked with, I think that 90% of them didn't do TDD at all. The way that I put it is that TDD it's a practice, it's a tool that you can use, and on my personal case, it was the tool that made me be better,
Sure.
almost at that level. the level that they are, because some people need tools and frameworks and processes to come up in terms of quality, and I was one of them. So it might work for you, it might not. It's not the only way of doing it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to build software because most people don't do it, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
The proof would be that everything else fails, right? But
exactly.
I know I think that's a good way to put it. And I would say even, for people that are like, I don't like it or it doesn't fit, like it could absolutely be a thing. You maybe you genuinely don't understand it or you haven't practiced it. So that's, it's to, I guess, to rule it out as you just don't get it is not helpful.
Hmm.
But yeah, might be something you want to practice and try. And even so, if you do try it and you've given it a chance, you're like, it doesn't really fit as well for me. Like, I think at a minimum, you learn about some patterns and practices that you could take pieces of it and say, well, here's the value, and maybe when this scenario comes up, I can
Yeah,
apply it.
I think that, yeah, for example, I don't apply TDD in every single problem that I have to solve.
Sure.
There are some places where the value is there and it's quite natural to do it. Other places, if you do it, you are wasting your time. You are wasting hours, to be honest. Um, but understanding that in this particular case, it's a valuable tool. I don't feel confident with this code. Let me write the test first. It might be helpful. That's why I say that it's a valuable skill to be aware that it exists. How do you practice it? It doesn't mean that you need to buy the T-shirt saying "I love TDD." Is not the thing. But also, I have learned, oddly enough, by finding the way that TDD works for me, made me write tests better.
Hmm.
And now I also can teach how to write tests better, even to someone that will test after. Because
Sure.
you learn a lot when you try to write tests first, okay? Because
Yeah.
it's unnatural. It's not. It's like that thing that crossing your fingers, right? If you are used to do this, eventually doing this feels unnatural, right?
Yeah.
And we have learned to write code by writing the hello world. No one told us to first write a test. And we do that for a long time. And eventually someone comes and says, no, if you want to be a great developer, you need to first write a test. No, it will not be the way that things will
Right.
work. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people that, if you go through a lot of your development in the beginning and you're not writing any tests, then someone says, hey, start testing. Even if it's after, they go, well, I have to rewrite all of this code. Like everything that I just wrote, I have to rewrite so that it can be tested. And then it reinforces like testing sucks. It's so much more work. Why would I ever do this?
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, if like one of the big lessons that you can learn from testing first is like, how are you going to write code that can be tested? So that if you're going to test after, you're not like, hey, I spent 2 weeks writing this code.
Yeah.
Now I got to go write tests because I put the PR up with 10,000 files changed and the first comment is test question mark, and you go, guess I have to change all of these files. You learn to do these things ahead of time, and that way if someone says tests, you go, oh yeah, let me just go add them, not let me go rewrite everything I just did.
Exactly. That is true.
No, that's awesome. Well, thanks for the insights about TDD there, because it's like I said, it's really cool to hear someone saying I love TDD and use it a lot, but also acknowledging, because I think it's important for other people to hear, like it's not the only way, but it's still a valuable tool.
Yeah.
Um,
We all
I
have
think
different tools that we use in our day to day, and we don't need to use the same to
right.
be successful. You might use Notion, I might use Apple Notes or Obsidian. We can
Yeah,
achieve the same things by doing things differently.
as long as we're all using
Yeah,
C#, it's all that matters, right?
it's all good.
No, that's cool. I wanted to spend a little bit of time, sort of at the end of our conversation. You're talking about the work that you're doing now, course creation, content creation, because like for myself, I haven't been doing it as long, but it's been a shift in terms of like, I
Yeah.
want to be helping educate, putting content out there to help others. And for you, this has been literally a career shift into this
Hmm.
space. So I don't know, I don't have like a specific question, but like, could you maybe talk about some of the shift in perspective to being able to say, okay, I'm not just writing code to ship it to a customer, but now I'm trying to create, whether it's more code or content, to try and explain concepts and maybe how you balance all of these different things, like what to focus on and all of that?
Mhm. So there's the first thing that everyone will usually think when they see someone that does what we do. Not your case, because you still work in a big company doing your job. Is how do you stay update?
Right.
Is that in fact knowledge that is applicable? Is that in fact something that is useful? And that's fair to think about that. What is important to consider, in my opinion, is if that author has experience in the past that sustains the things that he's saying.
Sure.
Okay. For example, I don't have a linear career progression, so it seems complete strange if you look into my career path. But I know that I have a diverse set of experiences that gave me different perspectives to talk about new things. And also, you still need to keep developing, applying things, trying out things. The difference is that since you will be talking about that, you need to dig deeper than usually you would do in your day to day. For example, if someone asks me to, okay, let's bring open telemetry into our project,
Right.
um, I would go to the getting started. I would apply it. Eventually, I need to do a small improvement because I'm looking for something. I would Google it, do it, but I wouldn't take the time to go deeper and understand the why something exists, what's the best way of putting that in practice. And also, once you have done that to deliver a course, you have the other part, that is, how will I deliver this information in a way that it sticks to that person? um, and that's the most challenging part. But worse than that, to be honest, is the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
um, that
Yes.
I used to say, if you think that you have imposter syndrome, sometimes you need to think about those that are doing something for hundreds of people or thousands of people, that are from a profession where we used to criticize every single line of code.
Yeah.
So you need to know how to deal with that, to overcome that imposter syndrome. But above all, you also need to learn how to ignore some comments, because some people are a bit rude, to be honest. And you need to filter the thing, what you are getting from the outside.
Right.
But then you will take pleasure from different things. You will take pleasure not from building an elegant line of code, but from one coming up to you and writing a comment on YouTube saying, I tried to understand this so many times and now finally I got it. There's nothing better than that, to be honest.
Right.
Uh, in at least in the way that I approach my profession. So I would say that we keep doing every single thing that I used to do, but then there's this part of researching a bit deeper and trying to find ways to deliver that information in an effective way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Thank you for the framing there. I've talked before, even for people that are trying to learn things, right? You don't have to necessarily be a content creator or an expert in an area, but I like letting people know, like, hey, if you're going to dive into something and learn about it, one way that you can like almost test your effectiveness of how you learn that topic is try to teach someone else about it. Don't try to pretend to be an expert on it. That's not what I'm saying. Like, don't spend a week like learning something and then say, hey, I'm an expert now, I'm going to go charge people for it, because like people can see through that. But if you say, like, here's this thing I'm learning about, here's like my takeaways and my ideas, like, I think that you get a couple of awesome things about sharing that kind of stuff. One is you can get feedback from people,
Mm-hmm.
but the other thing is this process of, here's what I think that I learn and I understand. If I have to try now and articulate it to a different group of people, maybe other people, that have never seen this kind of thing, you go through this like this mental gymnastics of how do I explain this now?
Yeah.
And you start to quickly realize, and I'm sure you've even had this, the imposter syndrome part really resonates with me, where you go, I know these things, or I think I know them. Now, if I go to explain them, it's like, why does it feel like I can't explain it? Like if I had to go use it in Visual Studio and make a program, I could do it in a second, but now I have to find a way to explain it. Do I actually know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Oh no.
And that's a valuable skill for any developer to be honest. I know. Do you run any type of knowledge sharing session in your team? Yeah.
Yeah, not so we do. I don't currently run like a dedicated one, but there is a lot of like, hey, if you've been building out feature areas, like this is something the whole team has to work with for on call, let's say.
Mhm.
So like it would be good if other people were brought up to speed and that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
I used to be the one pushing through those sessions and sometimes trying to manage them in many of the companies that I worked on, because I really like this idea of getting knowledge and sharing it back. So I always have done that. And it's so hard to find someone to come up and share the things that they know. And also, I realized that by the fact that we tend to not do that as much, we get to a point where we are not comfortable to share what we know, and we can't um, explain it in a clear way.
Yeah.
You might know it, but you think that is so obvious that everyone will get it. For example, if you build content online, you know this thing that I will say. We often get criticized by the type of code that we put in demos.
Yep.
It's too simple, or this doesn't happen in the real case, or this is not enterprise software. There's this mistake, there's this and that. And I get all of that. But if I try to come across with a message and I need to bulletproof that code to be deployed in a S&P 500 company, I would bring so much complexity that I wouldn't deliver the message that I want.
You'd still
Sometimes
be
I
making
want,
your first YouTube video, right?
yeah. So I forgot what I was adding to with this conversation, but that process of understanding what really matters is something that is useful for everyone that is a developer, because what we do is communicating through code,
Right.
right? And if we can communicate to our peers in a small session to explain something, I think we are losing something.
Right.
I have seen some companies where in order to progress in your career, you need to also be the mentor and pushing with new knowledge and things like that. So eventually, in your career path, if you are not perceived as someone that can guide others to a different level, you will not be promoted. So that's why I believe that it's also important, even if you don't want to be a content creator or things like that, being used to share, to
Yeah.
to express your ideas. And you can do that through blog posts. You can do an internal blog, an internal newsletter. You can do small conversations like meetups and things like that. But doing something is something that takes you to a different level, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this idea. So I love the idea of the mentoring ability to help level up other people around you. Like basically anywhere I've worked, that's been a big aspect of like moving ahead in your career. The other thing that feels less tangible but is exactly aligned with that is like not only just helping say other junior people around you and helping them move forward, but when we're talking about impact and influence, generally it's going to involve, depending on the size of the company, other teams and stuff, and being able to talk with other stakeholders and work on bigger projects. Like if you're unable to communicate ideas effectively, those types of things start to suffer,
Yeah.
and you have a lot of friction, and you're like, why is it so hard to work with this team, or these people just don't get it? And it's like, communication goes, it's at least two sides when you're communicating stuff.
Hmm.
So it's easy to sit there and say, it's just their fault. Like they
Yes,
obviously don't get it, but like, hey man, like maybe it's a little bit of you too.
I agree with that. I really, it's one of those skills that, for some reason, due to stereotypes and things like that, we got used that it's normal
No, yeah,
to not be a good communicator being a developer.
that's right.
But it's something that everyone can improve, and you don't need to be uh, Anselman. You can still be a normal developer and doing something a bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. The communication part goes a super long way. So it's cool to hear that you kind of had that same experience, and that and with content creation you've kind of realized like sorry, I shouldn't say it made you realize, but it is reinforcing this
Hmm.
this idea,
Yeah.
right? So no, that's awesome. Well, Guy, I wanted to say like I'll absolutely get links and stuff from you after to make sure I can share
Hmm.
out. But um, you got courses and stuff. You want to give audience a bit of an idea what courses you have available, uh, different ways they can reach out to you and find you and stuff, and then I'll make sure that I grab all of that from you to jam in comments
Yep.
and descriptions.
For sure. So, courses. I have my courses on dometrain.com. No, I have 3 courses there. One on test-driven development, another one on clean code, and another one on open telemetry. That is the most recent one. Regarding other stuff going on, I have a YouTube channel with my name. Just look for it. You might find me, or a Brazilian singer that has beautiful love songs. Um,
Either one would be good. Then
yeah,
is what
exact.
you're saying? Okay.
Subscribe to both. That's my opinion. Uh, and so you can find on me on YouTube. I have a lot of things about software development there. Many of them in .NET, other things that are a bit more generic in terms of being a developer.
Sure.
And also, I have a newsletter that I usually only push something once a month. So you can find that on my website as well, my name.me, so guiferreira.me. And yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and those things. I'm not on TikTok, to be honest.
What? No TikTok?
No
Okay. Well.
TikTok. I need to move there. Start dancing.
Cool. No, well, thank you so much. This is a really awesome conversation. I do appreciate your time, your insights. It's really cool to hear your journey. Obviously, you're a very successful content creator, and it's really cool to see that you've been able to take things that you've done professionally and help educate other people, and from your experiences, just make other developers better. So that's awesome to see.
Thank you, Nick. It was awesome. I hope we can have another one like this
Yeah,
other
I would
time.
love to do that. That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks
Okay.
so much.
See you
We'll see you
soon.
next time.
Bye bye.